At family gatherings I always believed the laughter and smiles meant love, but one night I overheard relatives mocking me after I left the room. And in that instant, I realized I had been living in a play where affection was performed for my face and cruelty reserved for my absence. I cheated on Sarah 3 weeks ago, and it started with overhearing my own family tear me apart like vultures over roadkill. Know that moment when world tilts sideways and realize everything believed was a lie? That was me standing outside my brother's kitchen at his anniversary party, listening to my cousins, aunts, and uncles dissect me with surgical precision. Poor Sarah, my Aunt Linda was saying, her voice dripping with that sympathy she'd perfected over 60 years of gossip. She has no idea what she's gotten herself into with Mark. That boy couldn't commit to a breakfast cereal, let alone marriage. The louder that followed felt like glass shards in my chest. My cousin Jake chimed in. Remember when he quit law school to become a freelance writer? Sarah's basically supporting a grown man child. I give it 6 months after the wedding before she realizes she married a. I stood there in the hallway, holding 2 glasses of I'd gone to refill, feeling like I was watching my funeral through a window. These were the people who'd hugged me 20 minutes earlier, who'd asked about the wedding plans with bright smiles, who told me how proud they were of me. The worst part, my brother Tom said, and hearing his voice join the chorus nearly dropped me to my knees, is that he actually thinks he's some kind of catch. Walking around like he's God's gift, when really Sarah could do so much better. She's got that promotion at the firm, she's buying the house, she's planning the whole wedding. What exactly is Mark contributing besides his sparkling personality? More laughter. My Uncle Bob, at least he's consistent. Remember how he treated Jessica in college, strung her along for 2 years, then dumped her the week before graduation because he needed to find himself. Now he's doing the same thing to Sarah, just with more steps. I wanted to burst through that door and defend, but the truth was sitting in my stomach like a stone. Every word they said was accurate. Sarah was carrying our relationship. She was paying for most things while I chased my writing dreams that hadn't paid more than $300 in the past year. She was planning our wedding while I complained about every vendor meeting and venue tour, but that went deepest came from my own mother's voice. I just don't understand how I raised him to be so selfish. Sarah's such a sweet girl, and she deserves someone who actually appreciates what they have. Instead she's got Mark, who'll probably spend their honeymoon complaining about the Wi-Fi. That's when something inside me broke completely. I set those glasses down on the hallway table and walked out of that house without saying goodbye to anyone. I drove to downtown, to the bar where I used to out before Sarah and I got serious, and I ordered whiskey until the voices in my head quieted down. That's where I met Rebecca. She was sitting alone at the other end of the bar, scrolling through her phone with the kind of focused attention that screamed avoiding human contact. She had dark hair that caught the light when she moved, and when she looked and caught me staring, she didn't look away. "Row night?" she asked, sliding down 2 bar stools to sit next to me. "Could say that." I finished my drink and ordered another. "Just found out my entire family thinks I'm a piece of." She laughed, and it wasn't the polite, careful laugh Sarah gave me when I made jokes that weren't quite funny. This was real sharp, almost mean. "Join the club. I just found out my ex is engaged to the woman he told me not to worry about." We talked for 3 hours. About families that pretend to love. About relationships that make feel smaller every day. About the gap between who think are and who the world sees when they look at. Rebecca didn't know about Sarah. I didn't mention a fiancé or a wedding or the fact that I was supposed to be home hours ago. For 3 hours I got to be just Mark, not Sarah's underachieving boyfriend, or the disappointment of the family. When Rebecca suggested we go back to her place, I said yes. I told it was just talking, even in the Uber, even walking to her apartment, even sitting on her couch as she poured more drinks. I told I was just getting perspective, just having a conversation with someone who saw me as more than a collection of failures. But when I back. When she pulled me toward her bedroom, I followed. When she whispered that I seemed like someone who deserved better than whatever was making me so sad, I believed her. For 4 hours in a stranger's bed, I forgot that I was the family disappointment. I forgot that I was the dead weight in my relationship. I forgot that every person who mattered to me thought I was a selfish who didn't deserve the woman I was supposed to marry in 4 months. I remembered who I used to think I was, before the world spent years showing me otherwise. The sun was coming when I finally checked my phone. 17 missed calls from Sarah. 23 text messages that started worried and escalated to frantic and finally landed on and confused. "Where are? Did something happen at Tom's? Mark, please call me back. I'm getting scared." I called Tom and he said left without saying goodbye. "Are okay. It's 3 a.m. and not answering. Did we have a, what did I do? Please just tell me are alive." The last message, sent at 5:47 a.m. was, "I love." I stared at those 3 words while Rebecca slept next to me, her hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. Sarah loved me. Sarah, who was everything my family said she was, brilliant and kind and too good for me, loved me despite being exactly the person they said I was. And I'd just blown our entire because I couldn't handle the truth. I got dressed in the dark and left Rebecca's apartment without waking her. I drove home in the morning light, practicing explanations that all sounded like exactly what they were, lies to cover the most selfish thing I'd ever done. Sarah was asleep on the couch when I got home, still wearing the dress she'd worn to Tom's party, her makeup smeared from crying. Our wedding planning binder was open on the coffee table, and I could see she'd been working on seating charts while waiting for me to come home. I stood in our doorway, looking at the woman who loved me despite every reason not to, and felt the weight of what I just destroyed settle on my chest like a boulder. She woke when I closed the door. "Mark." Her voice was small and scared. "Where were?" And that's when I realized that the performance my family had been putting on for years was nothing compared to the one I was about to start. "I'm sorry," I said, and began the first lie of what would become hundreds. "I just needed to drive around and think. I should have called." She sat, reaching for me with relief flooding her face, and I let her hug me while the smell of another woman's perfume still clung to my skin. The worst part wasn't that I cheated. The worst part was that I already knew I was going to do it again. I kept seeing Rebecca, and each time I told it would be the last time. That lie became as routine as brushing my teeth. We'd meet twice a week at her apartment, and I'd spend those hours feeling like the person I wanted to be instead of the person everyone knew I was. Sarah started planning harder, as if she could sense something shifting. She herself into wedding prep with desperate energy, showing me cake samples and flower arrangements with the kind of enthusiasm that made my chest ache. She'd bought bride magazines and scattered them around our apartment like breadcrumbs, leading to a future I was actively sabotaging. Look at this centerpiece idea, she'd say, curled next to me on the couch while I texted Rebecca. I think the eucalyptus would look beautiful with the ivory roses. I'd make appropriate sounds and nod at the right moments, but inside I was calculating how long I could stay before I had to leave for my freelance meeting or networking event. The lies came so easily now that I scared. 3 weeks into the affair, Sarah started asking different questions. Seemed distracted lately. Are having second thoughts about the wedding. We been working late a lot. Are things picking with rating. Smell different when come home. New cologne. Each question felt like she was offering me a chance to climb out of the hole I was digging. But I was addicted to the feeling of being wanted by someone who didn't know all my failures, someone who thought I was worth sneaking around for. Rebecca made me feel like the protagonist of my own, instead of a supporting character in everyone else's story. The breaking point came during a family dinner at my parents' house. Sarah had insisted we go, despite my protests, and I spent the entire drive dreading the performance I'd have to put on. My family was particularly brutal that night, though they didn't know I could see through their act now. They asked Sarah about her job with genuine interest and enthusiasm, then turned to me with barely concealed pity. Still working on that novel, Mark? My dad asked, the way someone might ask about a terminal illness. Actually, Sarah jumped in, Mark just got a really promising lead on a copywriting contract. Tell them about the agency, honey. I had mentioned no such thing, but Sarah had clearly invented this success to protect me from their judgment. She was lying to my family to save me from embarrassment, while I was lying to her to destroy our relationship. The irony tasted like. My mother turned to Sarah with that syrupy voice that meant she was about to be cruel while pretending to be caring. You're so supportive, dear. I hope Mark realizes how lucky he is. The luckiest, I said, and meant it in a way that made me want to throw. After dinner, I was helping clear dishes when I overheard my Aunt Linda talking to my cousin Jake in the kitchen. She's glowing, Linda said, and I realized they were talking about Sarah. Look how happy she is talking about the wedding. It breaks my heart. Why? Jake asked. Because she has no idea what she's signing for. Mark's gonna disappoint her for the rest of her, and she's too in love to see it coming. They weren't wrong, but hearing it out loud felt like being flayed alive. That night I went to Rebecca's apartment and told her everything. About the family dinner, about how Sarah had lied to protect me, about how I felt like I was drowning in everyone's low expectations. So leave her, Rebecca said simply. If we're that miserable, just end it. It's not that simple. The wedding is in 2 months. Her parents already paid for the venue. She'd be humiliated. Rebecca looked at me with something that might have been disgust. So we're staying with her to save her embarrassment, but are cheating on her to save ego. The truth of that hit me like a physical. Alright, I said. I'm gonna end it with Sarah, tomorrow. But I didn't end it tomorrow, or the next day or the next week. Instead I into wedding planning with renewed enthusiasm, as if I could make for my betrayal by being the perfect fiancé in every other way. I went to cake tastings and nodded enthusiastically at flavors I couldn't even taste anymore. I smiled through venue walkthroughs and pretended to care about lighting and acoustics. I let Sarah's mom take us shopping for suits and acted grateful when she insisted on paying for mine. All while texting Rebecca throughout each event, counting the hours until I could escape to her apartment and pretend to be someone else. The cognitive dissonance was destroying me. I was living 2 completely different lives, and somehow failing at both of them. Sarah started getting suspicious around week 5. She found a receipt from a restaurant I'd never taken her to, tucked in the pocket of my jacket. Grazie's on 5th Street. When we're there. Business lunch, I said without missing a. That copywriting client I mentioned. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide whether to believe me. The fact that she chose trust over suspicion made me feel like the worst person who had ever lived. Okay, she said finally. We used to go to lunch together sometimes. I miss that. We should do that more often, I said, already planning how I'd cancel on Rebecca the next day to take Sarah somewhere special. But I didn't cancel on Rebecca. Instead, I took Sarah to lunch and met Rebecca that evening, juggling both relationships like a circus act that was bound to end in disaster. The lies were getting more elaborate. I had client meetings and fictional networking events. I'd created an entire professional that existed only to justify my absences. Sarah had started putting my work events on our shared calendar, and seeing them there, legitimized in her neat handwriting, made me feel like I was losing my mind. 6 weeks before the wedding, Rebecca told me she was getting tired of being a secret. I want to go out to dinner. Real dinner, at a real restaurant where we don't have to worry about who might see us. No, I can't do that. Why not? Said we're gonna leave her. I had said that, multiple times, usually right after we'd slept together when the guilt was overwhelming. I needed to believe I wasn't completely morally bankrupt. It's complicated. No, it's not. Rebecca was getting dressed, moving with sharp, angry motions. Or just a card. She was right, but hearing it out loud made me defensive. Knew the situation when we started this. I knew we're unhappy. I thought that men had integrity. Turns out just a liar who wants to have his cake and eat it too. We fought for an hour, and I left her apartment feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. But instead of going home to Sarah, I drove around the city until 2 a.m., sitting in parking lots and trying to figure out how I'd become someone I didn't recognize. When I finally got home, Sarah was waiting for me. "Me need to talk," she said in my turn to ice water. She was holding her phone, and I could see text messages open on the screen. "Who's Rebecca?" The world stopped spinning. My phone had automatically backed to our shared iCloud account, and Sarah had seen the messages while looking for photos from her sister's birthday party. She'd read everything. Every, "Candace, Sarah's working late, we have more time." Every, things were different. 6 months of lies unraveled in a single moment of technological betrayal. "Sarah," I started, but she held her hand. "Just don't," She was crying but quietly, like someone who had expected this moment and had already used all their shock. How long? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. How long? 6 weeks. The number hung in the air between us like a weapon. 6 weeks, she repeated. We've been planning our wedding for 6 weeks while I've been. She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm so sorry, I said, and meant it more than I'd ever meant anything in my air in love with her. The question caught me off guard. I'd been prepared for anger, for accusations, for demands to know details. I wasn't prepared for the quiet devastation of a woman who needed to understand how completely I'd betrayed her. No, I said truthfully, it's not about love. Then what is it about? How could I explain that it was about feeling like someone other than the disappointment everyone saw when they looked at me? How could I tell her that Rebecca made me feel like I was worth something, when the truth was that cheating on her proved I was worth nothing at all? I don't know, I said, which was both a lie and the truest thing I'd ever told her. Sarah nodded like she'd expected that answer too. I need to leave, she said. Tonight. Right now. Sarah, please. Let's talk about this. We can work through it. For the first time, her voice cracked. Mark, been living a double for 6 weeks. While I was tasting cakes and addressing invitations and calling vendors and planning our future, we're someone else. There's nothing to work through. The word sounded wrong in her mouth. Sarah didn't talk like that. The fact that I'd driven her to that kind of language showed me exactly how much damage I'd done. Where am I supposed to go? I honestly don't care. I packed a bag while she sat on our bed, staring at her engagement ring like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. What do we tell people? I asked. The wedding's in 6 weeks. Everything's already paid for. We tell them the truth, she said without looking. We tell them we're exactly who they always thought were. I stopped packing. What does that mean? Finally she looked at me and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, but a kind of tired recognition. I heard them too, Mark. At Tom's party. I heard what family said about my turn to ice. Knew. I've always known what people think about us. I just didn't care because I thought they were wrong. I thought they couldn't see what I saw in Bine. She laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. Turns out they were right. Are selfish. Are a disappointment. Can't commit to anything. Not even being faithful to someone who loves. Each word hit like a physical. Sarah. The worst part isn't that cheated. The worst part is that proved them right. Every person who ever doubted, every relative who ever whispered about how I could do better, every friend who warned me that weren't ready for marriage. Proved them all right. I wanted to argue, to defend, to explain that their expectations had pushed me to this point. But standing in our bedroom with my hastily packed bag, looking at the woman whose trust I'd destroyed, I realized that blame was just another form of cowardice. I had done this. Not my family, not their expectations, not their disappointment in me. I had made the choice to betray the one person who had seen past all of that and loved me anyway. I'm sorry, I said again. I know but sorry doesn't uncancel a wedding. Sorry doesn't give me back 6 weeks of planning a future with someone who was lying to my face every single day. I left that night and drove to the cheapest motel I could find. I sat on the thin mattress in a room that smelled like cigarettes and disinfectant, and I called Rebecca, I said when she answered. There was a long pause. So free now, she said finally. I guess so. Another pause. Mark, yeah, I don't want to see anymore. The line went dead. I was sitting alone in a motel room at 3 a.m., having lost 2 women in one night, finally understanding that being free from everyone's low expectations just meant being alone with the person I'd become. And that person was exactly who they'd always said I was. The wedding cancellation announcement went out the next morning. Sarah's maid of honor sent a group text that was a masterpiece of diplomatic destruction. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Mark and Sarah's wedding has been cancelled. Sarah is grateful for understanding during this difficult time. My phone started ringing immediately. I didn't answer any of the calls. By noon the real story had leaked. Sarah's sister had told their cousin, who told her husband, who told his brother, who happened to be married to my cousin Jake's wife. The whisper network that had spent years dissecting my failures now had fresh meat to feast on. The first text came from my brother Tom. The second came from my mother. How could do this to that sweet girl? The third came from my uncle Bob, called it. Or exactly what we thought were. They kept coming all day. A chorus of, I told so, from people who had spent years predicting this exact moment. The worst part was that every single message was deserved. I spent 3 days in that motel, living on vending machine food and ignoring calls from everyone I knew. On the 4th day, I ran out of money and had to face the reality of my situation. I had no job that could support living on my own. My freelance writing brought in maybe $300 a month on a good month. Sarah had been paying for everything: rent, groceries, utilities, car insurance. I'd been living like a captain while telling I was an artist pursuing his dreams. I called my parents. I need to come stay with guys for a while, I said when my dad answered. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung. Dad, I'm here. I'm just trying to figure out why I think that's a good idea. Because I don't have anywhere else to go. Mark just humiliated our entire family. Sarah's parents are friends with half our neighborhood. Do you have any idea what the last 4 days have been like for Mother? I hadn't considered that. In my spiral of self-pity I hadn't thought about how my actions would reflect on them. I'm sorry, I just need help. Another long pause. Can stay for 2 weeks, that's it. Long enough to figure out next move. But are sleeping in the basement, and are getting a real job. Not this freelance that's been enabling Peter Pan syndrome for the last 3 years. I moved back into my childhood bedroom in my parents' basement the next day. At 32 years old, I was living with my parents because I'd thrown away the only good thing in my for 6 weeks of feeling important. The job hunt was a special kind of humiliation. My resume was a patchwork of part-time gigs and abandoned projects. I had no references who weren't also family friends who now knew exactly why I was suddenly looking for work. The story had spread through our social circle like wildfire. Sarah worked at a prestigious law firm, and her colleagues all knew she'd been publicly humiliated by her cheating fiancé. The cancellation had made the local society page, because Sarah's family was prominent in the community, and now my name was permanently attached to the story. Local attorney Sarah Mitchell cancels wedding due to fiancé's infidelity. Google would never let me forget. I finally got hired at a call center, selling insurance to people who hung on me 40 times a day. It was soul-crushing work that paid $12 an hour. But it was the only place that would hire someone with my resume and my reputation. My coworkers were mostly kids in their early 20s who treated me like a cautionary tale. They'd whisper when I walked by and I'd catch fragments. "That's the guy who cheated on his lawyer fiancée, and can't imagine throwing away like that." At family gatherings, I became the elephant in the room. People would stop talking when I entered, then restart conversations with careful enthusiasm that fooled no one. My presence made everyone uncomfortable because I was living proof that their worst suspicions about people could be absolutely correct. My cousin Jake's wife would not make eye contact with me. My aunt Linda would ask pointed questions about my new job, with the kind of concern that felt like being dissected alive. My brother Tom acted like I was a stranger who happened to share his DNA. The worst was watching how they treated my parents. My mother, who had spent years making excuses for my lack of direction, now had to endure pitying looks from her friends. My father, who had always been proud of his sons, now had neighbors who knew his eldest was the kind of man who cheated on a woman like Sarah. I tried dating apps after 6 months, thinking maybe I could start over. But our town wasn't big enough for anonymity. Women would recognize my name from the society page story or hear it through mutual friends. First dates would end with awkward explanations and blocked numbers. The few women who were willing to overlook my reputation were either desperate enough to ignore red flags or looking for someone they could fix. Neither option felt like something I deserved, and both reminded me daily of how far I'd fallen. A year after the wedding cancellation, I ran into Sarah at a coffee shop downtown. She looked incredible. Her hair was shorter, she was wearing a sharp business suit, and she had the kind of confidence that comes from surviving something terrible and realizing you're stronger than thought. She was with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, well-dressed, wearing a wedding ring. They were laughing about something, and she looked happier than I'd ever seen her. Our eyes met across the coffee shop, and for a moment time stopped. She didn't look angry she looked free. She gave me a polite nod, the way to acknowledge any acquaintance from past, then turned back to her conversation. The man she was with didn't even glance in my direction. I was so irrelevant to her current that she didn't bother explaining who I was. I left without ordering coffee. 2 years later, I saw the announcement in the local paper. Sarah had married a federal prosecutor named David. The wedding photo showed her in a dress more beautiful than the one we'd picked out together, surrounded by the same friends and family who would have been at our wedding. But instead of me standing next to her, there was a man who probably never made her question her worth. A man who likely never made her lie to his family to protect his ego. A man who chose her every single day instead of treating her like a consolation prize. I stared at that photo for an hour, trying to imagine the alternate timeline where I'd been the person she deserved instead of the person everyone knew I was. 3 years after I destroyed my Rebecca reached out. "I heard we're single," she texted. "Want to get dinner?" I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to say yes, to go back to the woman who had made me feel special when everyone else saw me as a disappointment. But I'd learned enough about by then to know that Rebecca hadn't been the problem. I'd been looking for someone to make me feel better about who I was instead of actually becoming someone better. I deleted the message without responding. I still live with my parents. I'm 35 now, and I work at a mid-level insurance office where my biggest achievement is not being fired for incompetence. I have a studio apartment that I rent month to month because I can't afford a lease deposit, and I drive the same Honda I had in college. My parents love me, but they're embarrassed by me. My brother invites me to family events out of obligation, but I can see the relief in everyone's eyes when I decline. I've become the family member who gets spoken about in past tense even when I'm still alive. Remember when Mark was engaged to that lovely lawyer? It's such a shame how things turned out with Mark. Mark used to have so much potential. I browse social media sometimes, though I know I shouldn't. Sarah's Instagram is public, and her looks like everything ours could have been. Beautiful house, successful career, husband who posts pictures of her with captions like, "Lucky to be married to my best friend." She has a daughter now. A little girl with dark curls who looks just like her mother. In the photos, David is teaching her to ride a bike, and Sarah is pushing her on swings, and they look like the family I always said I wanted someday. But someday never comes when the kind of person who destroys good things for temporary feelings of importance. I think about that night at my brother's party sometimes. When I first heard what my family really thought of me, I was so angry at them for seeing me clearly, but the truth was that they weren't wrong. They were just early. I spent my whole being exactly the person they said I was, and when I finally had the chance to prove them wrong, I chose to prove them right instead. Sarah deserved better than me. She got better than me. Everyone got exactly what they expected except me. I expected to be the protagonist of my own story, but it turns out I was just the cautionary tale in everyone else's. The family gatherings still happen without me now, and I imagine the laughter is more genuine when they don't have to perform love for someone they've given on. Sometimes I wonder if they even remember to mock me anymore, or if I become so irrelevant that I don't warrant the effort. After all this time, I finally learned the difference between being talked about and being forgotten. Being forgotten is worse.